Welcome to the Money Mastermind Show. Let's talk money.
And welcome to the Money Mastermind Show. Tonight, we are going to talk about living as an expat or expatriate. With us to discuss that is our usual panel of people here for the Money Mastermind Show, and that is Kyle Prevost of youngandthrifty.ca, Miranda Marquette of Planting Money Seeds, Peter Anderson of Bible Money Matters, and Tom Drake of the Canadian Finance Blog, and myself, Glenn Craig, the Free from Broke. With us, we have a special guest, Andrew Hallam, author of The Millionaire Teacher and The Global Patriot's Guide to Investing. Welcome to our show, Andrew.
Thank you.
And before we start, if you're watching us live on our Hangouts page, there should be an app that allows you to ask questions. So if you have anything that you want to pose to us about living abroad and being an expat, please do that because we love answering questions. So, living overseas, it sounds like it's this great adventure, but for most of us, it's probably more of a dream than anything else. After all, it's not quite the same as being on vacation. There's all sorts of different considerations you have to take into your own hands, such as all of your finances. So let's go into that and try to figure out what it takes to actually live abroad. But before we start, where are you living now, Andrew?
Right now I'm in Lake Chapala, Mexico. It's about an hour south of Guadalajara. So
you're definitely, walking the walk, so to speak. You're already living abroad. And from what I understand correctly, before Mexico, you were living in Singapore for some time, correct?
Yeah, I was in Singapore for 11 years, and I was teaching high school English and high school personal finance at a really big school there called Singapore American School. It's one of about 40 international schools in Singapore, which is Singapore is a city-state. It's just south of Malaysia. It's sort of attached to Malaysia by a couple of land bridges, and there are about 5 million people that live there. So it was a really large school, mostly American kids, about 4,000 students.
Oh, wow. So you went there for teaching. Do you know of other jobs that are generally available? I mean, I always hear about something where you go over there and you teach for a couple of years and such in different programs in different places. Do you know of other jobs for those who move abroad to work?
Oh, there are so many jobs. Too many to list. I think one of the things that anytime you've got when I mentioned to you that we had so many international schools in Singapore, there were 40 or 50 of them, 40 of them, I believe. They're serving a community of expatriates. And so all of the kids are the children of expats. I didn't actually teach Singaporean kids at all. So of the 4,000 kids in our school, we may have had 20, 25 Singapore kids. So most of them, their parents were into shipping or in banking. They had banking jobs, or they worked for companies like Pfizer, Merck, Coca-Cola, Johnson & Johnson. They could work in IT. They could end up working in HR departments, actually being with any number of companies, with a Singapore-based company or a multinational company. So you name the job, an expat is doing it. It's a totally different world, but it's exciting.
So when you move to another country to take on one of these jobs, it's almost like moving to a small community from your home that's just in a foreign area.
I mean, it can be. I think if you move to a place like Saudi Arabia, you move into a very, very large compound. I think a lot of people really underestimate the number of people that live in these compounds in, say, Saudi. The compound that I'm thinking of is a school called Saudi Aramco. So Aramco is a big, giant an oil-based oil company. And they've got 30,000 people that live on this base. So you've got movie theaters and supermarkets, and people go for 80-kilometer bike rides within this base. They can leave, they can come and they can go as they choose. But in that sense, yeah, it's definitely a community. In a place like Singapore, if we move to Singapore, all of the teachers, we really scattered throughout the city/country. It's both really. Singapore is an independent nation, but it's really just the size of a country, size of a city, with about 5 million people. So we as teachers were spread everywhere, as were most of the expatriates that lived there and did other jobs, spread right out.
So when you're out there, you're not so much of just a foreigner in a sea of another country. You do have a lot of point of contact for people who are in a similar position as yourself.
Yeah, a lot of these countries, Singapore, for example, has a lot of expatriates that live there. So it's kind of nice though, because you can socialize and blend with the local people, and you can socialize and blend with people from all sorts of different cultures. So it's not just Canadians that I would be hanging out with. It might be Singaporeans, it might be Americans, the Dutch, you name it, that they're represented there. So it's kind of cool. It's like a giant mixing bowl.
Nice. That certainly sounds great, and it certainly sounds nice to visit other countries. But what benefits have you found living overseas and working to be an expat for so long?
Well, I mean, HSBC did a study fairly recently, and indicating that 68% of expatriates, those that live overseas, actually end up saving a significantly more than they were able to save in their home country. So we could use Americans as an example, because I know some of you guys are Americans. So they have Americans, as you know, or you may not know, they have to pay taxes on worldwide income. But there's like a foreign exclusion limit, whereby if you make less than, say, $99,000 US, you only pay the taxes within your country of residence. So in Singapore, for example, somebody making about, say, $90,000 US dollars a year would pay probably about 7 or 8% tax on that. So that's a huge advantage, number one.
And do you also pay taxes? That's paying tax to your home country. Are you paying taxes there as well?
If you make more than the foreign income exclusion of, and we're talking again for Americans, and that cap is about $99,000. If you make more than $99,000 US dollars, you'll pay tax in the United States as well. If you make less than that, then you just pay taxes in your adopted home country.
And that's only on earned income, right, Andrew? That's not on passive income?
That's just on salary. Yeah.
Yes.
That's just salary. And things do get a little bit complicated. Sorry, Miranda, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say the figure for 2014 is $99,200 for Americans, and then for 2015 it's actually gone up to $100,800. So
Okay,
that's the difference.
How did you know that, Miranda?
Because I have mad IRS skills. No, because the IRS stuff is all like on my tabs here. So because all I do is write about from now until about April 15th, all I will do is write about taxes. So
Fantastic.
So why is it that people would save more abroad? What is it that drives the fact that they can save more?
In a lot of cases, what will happen is, not in all cases, but in a lot of cases, accommodation could be paid for. And that's a huge thing. I mean, I think that most people end up spending about a third of their income on accommodation, whether that be mortgage or rent. So once you eliminate that, you can save significantly more. There's also the draw, for a lot of these corporations, they know they're going to have to pay very competitively to get foreign workers there. So my salary, for example, as a school teacher was significantly higher than it was in Canada.
In Canadian dollars, I'm assuming, right?
Correct.
Okay. Wow. So there are some real benefits to taking that shot and moving abroad.
Yeah, there's some huge benefits, and some of the nice things is if you can find a place where you're earning first world money, but you're actually able to travel within the third world. There are great travel opportunities, and that's one of the things that kept me there so long. Is I was making first world money in Singapore, but I was able to travel in Thailand and Vietnam and Indonesia and Malaysia, where costs were so much lower.
And so when you were paid in Singapore, were you paid in Canadian dollars? Were you paid in US dollars? Were you paid in the Singapore dollar? How did they pay you? What currency did they use?
Each place it'll be different depending on your employer, but my employer was paying in Singapore dollars, which is quite a stable currency. Actually has a partial peg to the US dollar, but not perfect peg. At times when the US dollar was very, very strong, around 2003, it would take about $1.75 Sing to buy one US dollar. Today it takes about $1.30 Sing to buy a US dollar. That's more or less fairly stable. That's more or less where it's been for the past probably 6 or 7 years.
So on top of salary, what other financial considerations are there? Like, what do you do with your money? Where do you put it? How do you set yourself up when you're living in another country?
Well, I mean, it really does depend on the jurisdiction you're in, and it depends on the country that you're from. I could give you an example, a Canadian example here, which is a massive advantage for, this would apply to Canadians, Australians, British, New Zealanders, just about anybody other than Americans. Unfortunately, you guys don't get the best deal here, but say as a Canadian, if I'm living in a tax capital gains free zone, which Singapore is, in Hong Kong they don't pay capital gains taxes. I don't believe they do in Thailand. I know in Luxembourg they do not pay capital gains taxes. So here's the thing. If I open an investment account as a Canadian and I open it in Singapore, because there's no capital gains taxes, there are no capital gains taxes charged in Singapore, I can open my account and the account can grow tax-free.
Nice.
Right, but you have to open it with after-tax dollars, I assume.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. But then, of course, you can pull it out, and you'll never get taxed on it. So it doesn't matter how much money you've actually made on it.
Right.
There are no taxes to pay, and there's no limit. So it's not like an IRA for Americans or an RRSP for Canadians where there's a limit in terms of how much you can actually put in. You can put in as much as you want. So that's a huge benefit for non-Americans.
Right. So basically, I should move to Canada and then move somewhere else in order to really make
Well, the question is do you want to give up your U.S. citizenship?
That girl, that's exactly it.
That's the question, Miranda.
Because, and actually there are quite a few. There's an increasing number of people giving up their U.S. citizenship just for the tax savings recently.
Although you can't say that, or else they get real cranky. Seriously, it's for tax savings?
Yeah, some of them are. Some of them are giving up their American citizenship for tax reasons, especially if they're earning more than that foreign exclusion amount. They start to not want to pay taxes in the U.S. And so there's actually been a rather large increase in the number of people giving up their U.S. citizenship,
including companies.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Well, the co-founder of Facebook did that, Eduardo Severin. He lives in Singapore, and he relinquished his citizenship, and that was a main impetus for him.
But I mean, and relinquishing your citizenship though does come with costs. You do have to pay to do it. The U.S. government will charge you money to give up your citizenship. So there's a big interview process to go through and a big fee to go through, and the fee's actually gone up in recent years too. So.
And then
you gotta run the numbers, see if it works for you.
Then they're really mean if you come to the United States to visit. Yes. I've got a friend who relinquished her citizenship, and she grew up in the 60s, and she's retired and lives in Victoria, British Columbia. And every time she comes down to visit her mom now, she gets searched, like literally strip searched every time she comes down. So yeah, you get kind of blacklisted.
Yeah. You gotta decide if it's worth it.
Yeah, that's the decision that my wife and I have been looking at, because we're both expats exactly the same way, Andrew, where we were born in the States but lived in Canada our whole life. And so we're sort of looking at the situation Miranda just talked about, where it's not so much the taxes, because we don't hardly pay any, because in addition to that $99,000, there's a tax duty with Canada. So unless you have a situation where you'd be paying more taxes in the USA than you would be in Canada, which is almost never, unless you own a small business, there's a very select, anyway, for most people there won't be. It's more the preparation time and the preparation expertise that is so costly right now. And there's like 1 million of us across Canada. So could you shed a little bit more light on maybe what you'd recommend or what the pros and cons of the relinquishing process is in terms of American expats specifically?
To be honest, I wish I could, but I don't know. Miranda?
Well, I was hoping to shed this beautiful light. I know for sure. And
well, I'm not to the point where I would give up my U.S. citizenship, so I can't.
Well, let's maybe make this clear, though. To be an expat doesn't mean that you're necessarily giving up your citizenship.
No.
It's an option, right?
Right, yeah, no, giving up your citizenship is a way to get around the taxes. That's the only thing. I mean, if you want to live in another country, that's not a problem. You just have to be willing to you do have to file your tax return with the IRS. Even if you don't owe taxes and you're within that exclusion amount, you still have to file every year. The IRS wants you to file your taxes. You have to file extra forms.
Yeah, that are really...
And then...
You have to file this thing called an FBAR. And you have to list all your bank accounts and assets, your international. So if you own a company, you have to list all the bank accounts associated with that company. Anything with your name on it has to be reported to the IRS in pretty significant detail.
Right.
How complex is that? If you're living wherever you are abroad and from whatever country you're from, dealing with those tax issues, are there experts in the country that you're going to, like a CPA equivalent in the U.S. that can help you? Or do you find somebody in your native country that can help you? How does that work?
No, you'll usually be able to find somebody offshore. Anywhere there's a market for that kind of thing or for that kind of employment, people are going to be gravitating towards that. So yeah, you can find, in fact, you can even find Singapore companies that deal with U.S. taxes, and they'll be your U.S. tax accountant as an expat living overseas. Or you can find American companies. You can find Americans actually doing it. My wife, for years, did her U.S. taxes with a Singapore company, which was kind of interesting.
Yeah, and the other thing you have to think about too is you have to coordinate your U.S. taxes with the taxes in whatever country you're living in. So you have to take that into account as well. I know, even though I wasn't an expat and I wasn't living overseas, I did do work for a Taiwanese company, and I was paid by this Taiwanese company, and I had to pay taxes in Taiwan, and then I had to mention it in my own tax return, and it wasn't a huge layer of complexity, but it added a little extra layer of complexity. And I'd imagine if you're living overseas and you have to pay taxes in multiple countries, then you start having to really start juggling things.
Yeah. And another drawback to for living overseas is that for Americans, you guys, unless you're working for an American corporation overseas or you're working for the U.S. Embassy, you're not going to be contributing to Social Security. So this is really one of the main reasons I wrote the book that I did, The Global Expatriate's Guide to Investing, is to show people how much money they really ought to be saving, while considering that they're not going to be getting, or in some cases, any Social Security at all if they stay abroad for their entire careers. My wife's a perfect example. She hasn't really worked in the United States other than 2 years. So she's contributed very, very little. So she really won't be eligible for anything at all from Social Security.
So, Andrew, is there any chance that the U.S. is going to join the rest of the civilized world in not taxing based on citizenship as opposed to residency?
They're doing the opposite, in fact, Kyle. They're doing what they can to grab whatever money they can because the U.S. government it's in a bit of trouble. So, no, the answer to that question is most definitely no. They're coming after anything that they can grab a hold of. And I'll give you an example of that. If, let's say, I'm an Australian and I'm living in Malaysia and I buy a bunch of exchange-traded funds, like index funds, that happen to be domiciled in the United States. So a Vanguard S&P 500 index, let's say. And let's say that index trades on the New York Stock Exchange, that ETF. So if that Australian guy lives in Malaysia, when he dies, if that amount of money that he has in that U.S. domiciled ETF exceeds $60,000 US, his heirs could end up getting slapped with a U.S. estate tax bill, which is pretty nasty stuff. Kyle, as a Canadian, of course, this thing doesn't apply as a resident Canadian because you've got a tax treaty there. In that case, that limit is something like $5.5 million worth of global assets before you can be slapped with U.S. estate tax. But for expatriates, it's a significant thing to consider. So what I did when I was building an investment portfolio of samples for expatriates of different nationalities, what I did was I made sure that the exchange-traded funds that I had listed in the book were not domiciled in the United States. So you can still buy an S&P 500 index that trades on, say, the Toronto Stock Exchange or trades on the London Stock Exchange, but it's best not to have it trade on the U.S. Stock Exchange because they're coming after people.
And,
Wow.
and for those people that think like I'm just intentionally being provocative, I think I should point out that I am. But
You always are.
The U.S. there's one other country in the world that tax is based on citizenship, and it's Eritrea. And I'm not even pronouncing that correctly. It's probably like 179th in GDP in the world. That's the only other country for those people that think I'm exaggerating.
It's okay. As soon as the day that the U.S. does a single payer healthcare system, then we'll probably stop taxing on citizenship.
Now let me talk about some advantages for Americans.
Please, because so far it's almost sounded like if you live somewhere else, it's a great deal, but it's really complex.
You guys,
in the US. And I do know people that have moved abroad, so obviously there's some benefit to them.
absolutely. You guys have access to the best and lowest cost financial service companies in the world, bar none. There's no question about that. No question at all. You guys, in fact, can find actively managed mutual funds in the United States that are cheaper than index funds outside of the United States in a lot of cases. So you're really fortunate in that you can actually invest in, let's say, Schwab's ETFs, or you can invest in Vanguard, and you guys end up paying very, very low fees as expatriates. So that's one nice thing. The second thing, other things that I want to mention is you guys can keep your driver's licenses. I mean, that sounds kind of funny, but if I move overseas, one of the important things for me to consider is to cut my residential ties. Otherwise, the Canadian government might deem me on some kind of very extended holiday and decide that they want to tax me on my income. And so they could feasibly do that if I decide that I'm going to keep a Canadian credit card, a Canadian driver's license, my Canadian medical, especially if I start using my Canadian credit card. So my residency status can be jeopardized in that case. So there are stories of people that have been away for a couple of years and then have gone back to Canada and been slapped with a tax bill from Revenue Canada for the income that they earned while they were overseas. So, there's the two sides to it. It could be a lot more convenient for Americans because they can keep all of their accounts in the United States. They don't have to drop their driver's licenses and things like that.
Now let me ask you about that, because you just mentioned credit cards and such. So how do you spend the money that you're making over there? I think you mentioned about opening up a bank there, I believe. So what do you use for credit cards? You said you can't use the Canadian credit cards. Do you have ATMs or an equivalent over there?
Of course. Yeah, of course.
How does it work? Is it a different process?
You can open up a bank account and
to trade with shells and rocks?
Yeah. You might be surprised. We would open up bank accounts in Singapore, get visas through Singapore-based banks. So our credit cards are Singapore-based. And so, everywhere in the world will have it. And that's the nice thing about traveling today. Really, you don't need things like traveler's checks. You just need an ATM card. So anywhere you go, whether that's Morocco or Egypt or Hong Kong or Singapore or Thailand, you can take your ATM card. My ATM card is just for a Singapore bank. It could be for a U.S. bank. Let's say one of you guys wanted to travel overseas, take your ATM card, stick it into a machine, it'll draw funds from Wells Fargo or whatever bank you guys are banking with.
And when you're traveling to other places, either in Asia, Europe, wherever you are, Are you hit with a number of fees on those credit cards and your bank account?
No. I know that the U.S. does start to hit you with percentage fees, and for that reason, when abroad, I know my wife just uses or was using her Singapore credit card for that purpose because it was cheaper. So, you find the angles, you find the banks that are a little bit more or less cooperative, and you sort of work your way around it. Sorry, Miranda, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, I was just about to say, if I pull money from an ATM machine, I'll probably get hit with, I usually would get hit with, if it's a foreign ATM machine that I'm using, so I've got my Singapore card and I'm in Mexico, or my Singapore card and I'm in the United States, I'll probably get hit with about a $5 fee. So for that reason, when I do go to the ATM, I will pull out the maximum amount of money that I can and carry that cash with me.
Similar to like what we would do in the U.S. if we were going to an ATM that doesn't belong to your own bank.
Yeah, same kind of thing. Yeah.
You don't want to pull out $20 and get hit with the $5 fee.
And I was just going to say that there are some credit cards that are starting to ease up on charging like foreign transaction fees. I know a lot of the Capital One cards no longer do, and some of the American Express cards no longer charge foreign transaction fees. You might have ATM fees that you'll pay, but they are starting to like ease up a little bit on foreign transaction fees.
That's good to know.
So I'm curious, Andrew. Just was wondering if maybe you can give kind of just a quick top tips for people who are considering moving overseas or possibly doing extended teaching English or whatever. What are some of the top things you need to consider when you're doing that when it comes to your finances, I guess?
Well, when you're there, I think the important thing is to recognize that if you're not contributing to a defined benefit pension or your Social Security, you've got to save fairly aggressively and treat it not like a holiday, but treat it more like a life. And I think that's a mistake a lot of people make is they go there and it becomes it starts out like an extended holiday and they end up kind of living like that forever. So you can get people in international schools, you can get couples that save $100,000 a year as elementary teachers. And right next door to them could be another couple who teach grade 2 and grade 3, and they save be careful of, because you can come home after spending an entire career overseas and not end up getting Social Security. So that's a huge thing. I think another thing is it takes a certain type of person. I think to prepare for it, it's probably best that you have done some traveling and that you can accept things not being exactly as they are in the United States or in Canada, because things will be different. Some things will be different for the better, and other things will be different for the worse. But you have to be flexible and be able to recognize that it's not going to be exactly as it is at home. So I think doing a bit of traveling first and seeing how that feels is probably going to be a good indication of what your personality is like for that kind of transition.
Okay.
Do you find that there's maybe less of the whole keeping up with the Joneses, or not so much? We're getting a little bit of an echo now, but
I would say,
in the country that you're living in, is it more native that people tend to spend their money, or do they bring their habits?
I think there's usually a bit of a blend. That's a really good question, because you do take on the habits of the country that you're in. At the same time, you carry, you can take the American out of America, but you can't take the American, you know what I'm saying? Like, you take the American out of the United States, but you can't take the United States out of the American. There's that blending that actually occurs. So I would say is largely dependent. You have places where the keeping up with the Joneses is on steroids. Singapore and Hong Kong are those places. If you guys think you've seen Keeping Up with the Joneses, you got to visit one of those countries. For them, when you're successful, even if you're not that successful, it's very, very important for them to look successful when they've got wealth. So this can be something that starts to, it can become a habit for anybody that goes there, because it's slip into that culture and those habits slowly, but they can be quite damaging. On the flip side, if you come down to Mexico now, so we're down in Mexico now, and I'm not seeing that. I'm seeing people that I know can afford BMWs and Audis here in Lake Chapala, a lot of retirees down here, but they don't, because the Mexican people down here don't tend to be materialistic. And so, you kind of look silly driving around in a Jag.
Andrew, as a Canadian, you pretty much ready to move away to Singapore. But there's that echo again. What do you need to actually move? Like, does the company pretty much handle that for you?
If that's really dependent on a lot of things, isn't it? It's in some cases, yeah. In some cases, the company can. So if you know that you're working for a multinational company and you know that there are people that work overseas within that company, it's great to start asking around and to find out how you can actually do it. And in most cases, corporations or companies will actually move you. They'll fly you there. They'll send your shipping. So when I first went, everything that I owned, everything from my television to my bed to my couches, everything was shipped by the American school. Actually hired a shipping company to do it. So they give you a certain container size, and that, for me, I was able to. I had more than enough space in that container size to ship everything I owned.
Nice.
What other lifestyle changes do you expect to move overseas?
Well, Americans moving to Thailand, if they're there for a while, they usually end up marrying a Thai if they're single. I knew a guy who worked for an embassy, and he said he could always tell where the first post was for a diplomat, because he would ask, "Where's your wife from?" "Oh, she's Filipino." "Oh, your first post was the Philippines." And that happens, for a lot of single people that end up going overseas. That ends up happening. They settle down. They end up having families. So, yeah, that's nice. It's colorful.
Now, talking to you earlier, you said that you originally went to Singapore, and you were going to stay there very long. You ended up about 11 years. Do you find that happens with a lot of people?
It does. Yeah, it does. There are people that I'm sure, people that I knew that were deciding that they would just go for a couple of years, and they'll probably spend, if not their entire life there, their entire working careers there. Or they get the bug and they decide that they'll be there for a few years and then they'll move to Thailand or to Borneo, or they'll start sussing out where they can transfer to some different locations, because traveling kind of gets in the blood as well.
That's interesting. You certainly made from abroad, and I'm something. Do you find that people bring families overseas?
Yeah, they do. Yeah, most of the people I would say that worked at our school, they would be couples with kids, and it can be a great place to raise children as well. I mean, depending on what country you're actually in. Most countries are actually fairly safe, despite what you might see on CNN. And it can be a great place to raise children, because what you teach them is you teach them diversity. And if you're overseas and you put your child in an overseas school, an international school, you'll end up getting about, well, in our school, we had more than 50 different nationalities represented in one school. And so it's almost a perfectly ideal environment to be raised in, because as much as I could ever say there's no such thing as prejudice in a school like that, it's pretty darn close to being the truth.
Wow. So I think we've gone over a lot here. Is there anything that you would like to tell us, just to sum everything up, broad and financial considerations?
I think one thing that, if I was going to sum everything up, it's just the idea that, and this might sound a little negative, but it's not. It's meant to be positive. Everybody is terminally ill, and you've got a point where you're expiring, and nobody knows when that's going to be. It might be a month from now, and you might live until you're 95. And so one of those things is to to think about that bucket list and put it together, because a lot of people live life as if they're going to live forever. They ask silly questions like, you go to the doctor and you ask, well, doctor, am I going to die? Of course you're going to die. I mean, that's the reality. We're all going, and we don't know when. And so a lot of people put things off. They'll put off experiences for the future. When I don't think they should, when they recognize that, and a lot of people, they're sitting on their deathbed, will start clicking off the things that they wish they had done. And travel and experiencing different things is often one of those. So I think it's great to be able to take advantage of those things while you can.
Thanks so much for joining us. Andrew, this has been a great conversation. I love hearing stories about moving here abroad and how everybody else can be successful. For our audience, tell them a little bit more about yourself and your work.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Can you tell our audience a little bit about your writing books and what you do now?
Yeah, I've actually written 2 books now. The first book I wrote is called Millionaire Teacher, and it was a pretty successful book that became a national bestseller in Canada and hit #1 on Amazon for its genre. It was published translated into 4 or 5 different languages. Since I wrote that, I wrote the Global Expatriate's Guide to Investing, and mostly for the same reason I wrote Millionaire Teacher. Millionaire Teacher was my way of somehow educating the expats that I worked with that weren't saving and weren't investing intelligently. So I decided to write this book. At first I was giving out free books to loads of people that I worked with, and they didn't understand them because they found them to be quite tough. If you drop a word like equities in the first couple of pages, or you drop the word S&P 500 or market returns, a lot of people's eyes just glaze over. So I was able to write a book where mine, I was totally ignorant of what people actually understood and didn't. So when I wrote that first book, I got people together and I said, I want people that have never read a finance book, that know nothing about finance, and read a couple of these chapters for me and tell me what you don't understand. So I built the book that way by asking questions and making it really, really clear and avoiding jargon and explaining it as well as I could. And I think that was one of the reasons it ended up doing really, really well. Then for some more specifics, a lot of people would start to email me and ask me questions about how do I, I'm an Australian living in Egypt. How do I build portfolios of index funds? And I had to find out so I could get back to these people. And after a while, I realized, wow, I know quite a bit about this stuff. There's no real reason for any one person to know and to learn how this works for all these different nationalities. And then I figured I should put this down and write the second book, which I did. So that book just came out just on the 27th of this month.
And the title of that book again for our audience?
It's the Global Expatriate's Guide to Investing.
Excellent. Thank you again so much for joining us. And thank you everybody out there for joining us at the Money Mastermind Show. So be good with your money.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thanks for coming.
Thanks for joining us on the Money Mastermind Show. Get more information at moneymastermindshow.com. Don't forget to subscribe to the show on iTunes and YouTube and follow us on Google+.